Our next speaker is Felipe Adaime. He is founder and CEO of MOSS.Earth. And Louis, it's nice to see you again. I remember your talk from last year and enjoyed it then, so I'm looking forward to this one as well. MOSS's long-term vision is to digitize the whole global environmental system and to put it on blockchain so that it becomes decentralized, efficient, fast, exponential. Louis, I'll leave it to you from here.
Many thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Well, Will's points were quite well put and comprehensive, so I don't think I got left with much to say. I agree with basically everything that he said. I'd like maybe to complement with some of our views, and I'd love to hear what Will or the colleagues here think. I think the first point that he mentioned, we do see that. So I'd like to validate some of the data and market views that he's bringing. There's definitely a major supply squeeze or restriction going on. I think that it's very similar, or not that dissimilar, to previous commodity cycles. I view carbon credits as closer to a commodity than to a non-commodity, and as with the China super cycle, 2002 and 3 onwards, the system didn't prepare for the surge of demand that we have seen since 2019, 2020. And so much like, and I'm Brazilian, so, I witnessed that firsthand in terms of, oil and iron ore engineers getting paid like 10 times more all of a sudden because there weren't enough to hire. We're seeing the same in the carbon system, especially in places of high generation of carbon offsets like Brazil. There's a surge in demand for hiring of engineers, and I'd say, or just people with experience in carbon certification in general. And it's interesting, I think, to see that the incumbent system, didn't really prepare itself for all this surge in demand. I think part of the issue and the challenge, and this is what we are trying to solve or collaborate, in the solution, is that the system is still very much, it behaves and it functions very much the same way as it did, when Kyoto began or the CDM began. The certification process, it has become more rigorous, as Will pointed out, but it's still very much analog, very much manual, very consultative, and very, someone put it the other day, I thought it was brilliant. It's a cottage industry. And as anything that is, that works on a consulting basis and is very manual and depends on people's analysis and expert analysis and subjectivity, it's linear in its growth, but demand is growing exponentially. What I mean to say by that is, for example, for Vera, which is the key player, as Will mentioned, for Vera to double its, capacity analysis and certification capacity, it needs to more than double its number of engineers and analysts, and they need to hire double the number of people. There's very little digital leverage, and I think we at MOSS think that the solution comes through the digitalization of a large chunk of the process. I think a criticism, or maybe a better put, a suggestion for improvement over how the system works, is that Vera and the registries, the incumbent registries, they wear too many hats at once. It used to be, prior to April 2020, for example, that there were two major registries, right? APX and IHS Markit, for voluntary carbon offsets or voluntary carbon credits. And then Vera, generated the intellectual property and the certification process. So they were a guardian for the system, but they didn't really function as a registry as well. And then they began to function as a registry. And I think that is just way too many functions and power to just one player. I think that via the use of blockchain for that registry part does not need to be handed over, I think, or performed by an expert, an environmental expert, because it is merely an accounting and technology function. Like a registry is merely a digital notary office, if you want to put it, in an analogy. So I think that if we split the different hats that are being worn by the main registries, Vera, Gold Standard being the main ones, and we begin with the easiest one to replace with technology, which I think is the registry, the registration of transactions, so that there's no more double counting and double spending as there was in the past. I think we all, people who have more experience in the carbon markets know that in the past, that was a major issue, right? The fact that non-existing projects would sell, non-existing credits, or would sell the same credit more than once, or would retire the same credit more than once. Well, with blockchain, it's not that it's less likely, it's not possible with 100% certainty. So from the moment of that the credits were verified, certified, and issued, from that moment onwards, we don't think that that role, that responsibility needs to stay with the current registries as the system is set up nowadays, and that there's much efficiency to be gained by that. Another, I think, point, and that has been part of the, I think, the supply restriction. If we could digitalize that part of the process, we would already, I think, gain some speed, some efficiency, and potential for capacity expansion. Another point of improvement or suggestion that we have is that I don't think that the appointment and the nomination of the technical board and the way the process is improved or critiqued is very open. And nowadays, and this is all very fast moving in the world of technology, as we all know, there are best in practice governance structures on blockchain. The main one of which is known as DAOs, as decentralized autonomous organizations, in which we can distribute, a voice. We can have all the stakeholders, be it the project owners, be it the technical experts, be it the consuming companies, for all of them to give their input and to have that process be a lot faster, a lot more dynamic, and I think a lot more with a lot more credibility. So I would suggest, using this new the possibilities that the use of blockchain open via DAOs. And just on Will's point on the focus on NBS, we do see that. I think that in my opinion, of course, this is a reflection of the squeeze that we're going on. NBS is the hardest one, or one of the hardest ones to certify, but once certified, it's the easiest one to scale. You can, a conservation project of 150,000 hectares will generate millions of credits per year. And the equivalent number of reforestation or renewable energy projects that you need to have, will go to 100, 200 for the same quantity of credits. So of course, if you do a much lower number of NBS, especially RED plus projects, you generate a lot more credits a lot faster. So I think there is a focus in that sense of trying to reach scale fast in order to meet demand. I do think there's maybe a matter of the dilution of renewable energy, because of today's lack of additionality. As we all know, renewable energy has become the cheapest source, right, of electricity globally. So it's become incredibly difficult to have additionality and the certification capacity for renewable energy projects. And I do agree that in the future, carbon capture and fixation of the soil via sustainable agriculture will be a major source, but I think they all grow in parallel. Maybe NBS grows less than, agricultural credits, but and percentage-wise, maybe NBS, does not increase as much as carbon in the soil methodologies, but I do see them both growing just because the potential in emerging markets, especially in Brazil, as Schroeder's put it, Brazil is the Saudi Arabia of carbon credits. The potential for, considering that Brazil holds, such a high percentage of the world's rainforests, the potential for generation is at around 25 million credits per year. It could be something like 1.5 to 2 billion per year. So there's still a lot of untapped potential in NBS, and NBS relative to the others, I think offers the greatest room for digitalization of processes. Since we can have, since the use of satellite imaging, since it's a more mathematical approach, for example, for the determination of the baseline, and especially if you're working on a nested, jurisdictional RED benchmark or line of work, it's less of a manual, subjective cottage industry process, let's say, relative to furnace projects or even carbon in the soil methodologies. So I think as we have seen some players in the market creating or proposing alternative methodologies, for example, to VCS. NCX was presenting yesterday their own methodology for NBS. And I think given that, demand is higher than supply, and given that this leads to higher prices will, I think, or have created incentives and will continue to create incentives for us to create more pragmatic, dynamic methodologies relative to the existing ones. And then, as with everything in markets, if demand validates it, if people are buying it, it'll be validated. It might be criticized and eventually improved on, but the main bottleneck has always been, well, if I create an alternative protocol, will people buy it? And we think that if it's scientific, if it's done, if it's proposed in a very open way and open to criticism and suggestions for improvement via a DAO, for example, and we can tokenize that, I think that it can gain a lot of legitimacy and validation, and then it could be that new players focused on technology are creating alternatives to the current incumbent methodologies. And finally, IETA published an interesting feedback or analysis on their views of the carbon credit system. on blockchain. And one of the points of contention between the registries, incumbent registries, and I think more traditional players and the new entrants is whether there should be a secondary market on blockchain for these credits. The way I view it on the ground, my feedback from the projects that we work with and the projects that we are developing, co-developing, is look, the projects are happy, and they're happy because the prices are higher, and now, just like corn producers, they can sell when the prices are favorable to them. Whereas before, since the transactions were OTC and there was no liquidity before, players like Air Carbon or the tokenization of carbon credits, they only sold when a buyer showed up. So anything that really promotes liquidity is, I think, very healthy for the system. It promotes transparency on price formation. It promotes, I think, a greater equilibrium between the buyers and sellers. It used to be very distorted in a situation in which the buyers were, super small guys negotiating with gigantic companies like, well, I won't mention names, but and they got squeezed. So I think anything that brings a better liquidity and flow of resources to the projects is favorable, and I think we should promote it.
Well, Louis, thanks. We've got a couple minutes left, and I thought maybe what we could do is take a couple questions from the audience, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one is from Brian, who says, Louis, your comments seem very appropriate today. Are the large social media platforms like Meta or Twitter considering supporting carbon capture ideas with MBS or blockchain for social impact strategies? Those have been very diverse so far, and it seems that ethers-based approaches are of rewarding small actors or small farmers have been only modestly successful. How does blockchain shape up in the future for larger efforts around that?
Excellent question. Just in general, the tech crypto world, especially the blockchain world, has, as we all know, been criticized. I think unjustly criticized for the emission of carbon. The emissions on a relative basis to dollar transacted are quite low. It costs 0.05% to offset 1 Bitcoin, and much lower for other chains that use proof of stake. So I think it has been much ado about nothing, and just criticism without actual data. And the use of blockchain allows for what are nowadays fixed costs. For example, certification process for RED Plus costs $750,000. So of course, if you're 100-acre property, you have, you cannot pay for that versus, 100,000-acre property. And this is where digitalization and blockchain comes in place, because that cost becomes, marginally goes to zero, right? And we can scale the solutions, and we begin to be able to reach the really small guys.
Have you seen any consumer hesitation with tokenization and NFTs? Are you primarily focused on education, if so?
We have. We think it's unjustified. We have published a paper on the emissions of blockchain. We have found the emissions to be 1/10 or to 1/20th of previously published figures. The main, we think, a mistake that has been made is not updating the grid for the much higher percentage of renewable that is being used by Bitcoin miners, for example. And what we are doing is all the blockchain that we issue, for example, we already make it carbon neutral. So we are working with many NFT studios and blockchain issuers for their products to already come to the market being completely offset.
Great. I do see someone here, Heather is asking whether you can provide a deck or sources for the stats you're providing, and we can share that later as well, but maybe that's something to do offline. Yeah.
If you Google, if you look for my posts on Medium, Luis Adaime on Medium. You'll find the papers that I mentioned and the figures behind these arguments.
Great. Well, thanks, Luis. That was a great set of observations from you. I appreciate the insights. If anybody has further questions, feel free to reach out to Luis afterwards, and you can continue the conversation offline. But thank you, Luis, again.
Thank you.